Over the last 20 years, Fox released a series of 13 X-Men films that all relate to each other in some way, some more so than others. Now, it would be ideal in order to find a way to watch all these films in a perfect order, just like we can do with the MCU. Obviously, you can always go chronologically, but there might be a better way. Unfortunately, in order to do that, we have to figure out the timeline of these films, considering that a lot of people are confused by them. Honestly, it's not that complicated, but it does involve parallel universes, so there's that. The first film, definitively, is X Men First Class, which takes place during the 60s and sets up both timelines. Really, both of them start here. This is the definitive first film. Next up in the original timeline, which I'm going to be going over first, is X-Men Origins Wolverine, taking place during the 70s and some of the 80s, that features Wolverine's origin story. After that, we jump all the way to the 2000s for the original X-Men, followed swiftly after by X2, X-Men United, and X-Men The Last Stand, all of which take place in a pretty short time close to each other. There's only one movie in the 2010s in this timeline, which is The Wolverine, featuring Wolverine after the events of The Last Stand as he hops over to Japan to do some stuff. And this leads right into Days of Future Past, which takes place a while later during the early 20s in an apocalyptic future, although that's only half of the movie. The other half takes place in the past during the 70s, a decade after First Class, and thanks to the time travel shenanigans in this movie, kicks off a new timeline, set primarily during the 1900s and then after the 2000s. The next movie in this timeline is X-Men Apocalypse, following the Days of Future Past crew and taking place over a decade later in the early 80s. The same thing goes for Dark Phoenix, taking place a decade later in the 90s and pretty much ending all of the main X-Men films. In chronology, we then go over a decade without an X-Men film until Deadpool takes place sometime in the 2000s. Deadpool 2 takes place shortly after, and I like to think that New Mutants goes here, being a sort of bridge between Deadpool 2 and Logan, the definitive last film in the X-Men timelines that is the end of the new timeline. So, as you can see, it's really not that complicated, although the two timelines can make it unwieldy. So now that that's out of the way, we get to the watch order, the important thing. How should you watch these films? And honestly, release order is pretty good. X-Men is a solid place to start. It's the first movie in the timeline and really sets up everything. You can watch without any of the prequels, and I honestly think the prequels kind of ruin some of what happens here. The logical next film is X2 X-Men United, as it's a direct sequel to the first one, and same thing with The Last Stand, which is a direct sequel to X2. I put Origins next. There's honestly really no good place for it, but it doesn't really work before because it ruins stuff in X-Men United that doesn't really have anything to do with with Origins, but also does. And it's not really a prequel to the Wolverine, which is more of a sequel to Last Stand, but we have to watch it somewhere. The Wolverine is next, and it's basically a standalone Wolverine story, as I said, as he mourns the death of Jean Grey. And then that leads right into, the next movie is First Class. Wolverine ends with future Xavier and Magneto showing up to recruit him for Days of Future Past. And I like to think that First Class is them telling everybody about what happened for their first meeting. It's really good as a standalone. I don't know how well it would work up as a prequel to the originals, but considering that they're just arch enemies in that first one, I think it kind of ruins it. And none of the cast is in it except for them, so it's weird. And then, of course, First Class goes right into Days of Future Past. Both the future and the past stuff work here, the past stuff coming off of First Class and the future coming off of Wolverine. After that is logically Apocalypse, and then Dark Phoenix, which is the end of all of the main X-Men films. We then get into more of their spin-offs. I think Deadpool goes next as kind of a refresher after Dark Phoenix. And considering most of the team makes a minor appearance in Deadpool 2, which takes place right after, it kind of works to fit it here. You could probably also watch New Mutants first, but I think New Mutants works better after. Deadpool 2 features him breaking a mutant out of a mutant correction facility, and the New Mutants basically features the mutants breaking themselves out, a logical progression. They're also being held by Essex, the corporation responsible for killing all of the mutants in Logan with their weird anti-mutant corn syrup. So New Mutants works as a lead into that as well thematically. And of course, Logan is the end of the timeline. It's the end of the Watch Order, and it's a really, really fitting conclusion to all the X-Men films. And I think that this is the best order to watch them in order to get a cohesive story that really starts and ends with Wolverine, with some other fun and not so fun stuff in the middle. Thank you all for watching, and I hope this order works out pretty well.